Good, warm, sunny day. Well, it's good to be here with you. Again, thank you for the introduction. I spent a good chunk of time in Missouri, but I'm actually from Southern California. I born and raised Southern California, like a real Christian, right? No, we love Missouri, and we got to spend a good chunk of time there after Bible college, planting a church, and I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. But I am just so excited to be here with you guys today. I love Casey and Amy. They have become dear friends of mine. I met Casey about 4 years ago at a dessert event we were doing at our church in order to help raise generosity and funds to help invest in Refinery Church. And he came and talked about what God was getting ready to start here. And my wife and I were on staff, and we were sitting at this dessert and just got to share a table with Casey and hear his heart for the type of church that was going to be started and what he was hoping that God would do in this place. And now, 4 years later, I get to be here and see those dreams and those aspirations become realities by looking out in the crowd and seeing like real faces and real families and real people who are on a journey with Jesus, maybe for the very first time today and maybe since the very beginning. But I'm excited to be here because the way in which Casey has invested in me as a pastor and as a friend, as a fellow husband and father has just been a game changer. And so I can only imagine how much of a blessing it is to have him as your pastor because he has pastored me in so many ways. And I'm excited to jump in today and talk to you guys about the rhythms of life. And as I talked with Casey, he said, no pressure, but we're calling this the best sermon ever. And I was like, well, that's just a little bit of pressure. He said, if you will, talk about families, talk about, the rhythms of our life. And so we're going to talk about some things that will be especially applicable to families, but everything we're going to talk about is applicable to all of us. And I'm excited because I believe that all of us are here today because we have a unique or innate desire to be a little bit better at following Jesus maybe than we were last week. And if we're being honest, sometimes following Jesus is messy and confusing. And my hope is that today you'll leave with a little bit more clarity and a little bit more peace and that following Jesus will maybe be just a little bit more simple. And so we're going to take a look at Proverbs 22. To kick us off, we're going to be looking at Hebrews 12, and then ultimately we're going to end our time in Luke 15 and the story of the prodigal son. And what I love about this is, although all the themes that we will talk about today can be heavily applied to parenting and also to the rhythms of our life, and they basically are boiled down to this biblical mandate: to love God and love people. So if you have a pulse and you're trying to figure out how to like follow Jesus well, then like at the core of who we are, we should love God and love people, right? And now that's an oversimplification of the most important verse in all of Scripture, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. But these are things that, like, as a dad, I have been learning firsthand and have been challenged to get the rhythms of my life in order in spite of having every excuse to just survive the season that I'm in. How many of you guys have ever felt like you're just surviving a season? Yeah? Man, I can't tell you. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old right now, and there are days, like even like last night, we stayed in a hotel. We're like, man, it'll be so good. We'll come up early. And then we tried to sleep all in one bed with our 3-year-old and our 1-year-old's in like the closet/bathroom and a bassinet with a sheet over it. And I was like, we're going to get such good sleep before I go preach at this church. Did not happen, right? And yet I'm still called to thrive and not survive in this season. And I don't know what season you're in. Maybe you're a parent. Maybe you're an empty nester. Maybe you're a single mom raising kids. Maybe you're a young professional. Then today is for you because all of us have an opportunity to optimize and maximize the rhythms of our life in the good seasons and in the bad. So let me tell you a little bit about me. Like I said, I grew up in Southern California in Santa Clarita Valley. Anybody know where Santa Clarita is at? Magic Mountain. That's usually our big ticket item. So my mom and dad split when I was in kindergarten. My dad was a tattooed motorcycle, gun-toting, tough guy from the Bronx. And my mom is like a really short, tiny, sweet little lady who cuts hair and grew up in Santa Clarita Valley. I don't know if she's ever left Santa Clarita. She's terrified of planes, and my dad was like the loudest, biggest personality in the world. So they met when I got married, had my brother and I. They split when we were little, and we did not grow up with any sort of religion in our home, and I mean zero. When I got into high school, I fell in love with this girl named Ashley, who later would go on to become my wife. even though I had no idea that would happen at the time. I think we have a picture of her. Yes, that's my wife, Ashley, and I've got a 3-year-old daughter, Frankie, and a beautiful son named Bennett. And it was at the beginning of our senior year that Ashley looked at me and said, Connor, where I'm headed and where you're headed are 2 different directions. And if you don't get baptized and start going to church, then we got to break up. And I was like, oh, snap. I don't think that that's how this works. 1, I don't want to lose you. And 2, I think the church might implode if I walk into it. Like, do you know me? Like, I've never been in church. Like, I'm not a good guy. And so I had a lot of hesitations, but I was so scared to lose Ashley that I said, okay, fine, I'll go to church. And so she gave me the name of her church, and when they were meeting, and I said, yeah, that sounds great. I'll find my own church. And I was so stubborn, and I was so mad at her for making me go to church that I Googled churches in Santa Clarita. When she asked where I was going to go, I found this church called Real Life. And it was meeting at a high school at the time. And in my young, dumb brain, I thought, they meet in a high school. This can't even be like a real church. Like, this is awesome. I'm going to go to this like school program. And my girlfriend will get off my back. She won't break up with me. And so I show up at this church. And about halfway through senior year, I quickly fell in love with what God was doing. And I couldn't tell you why, but week after week, I kept showing up to this place. And each week I kept getting there earlier and earlier, and eventually started like setting up chairs and passing out donuts. And I was like, what happened? How did I go from like, I want nothing to do with religion to like, I love these people. And again, I could not tell you why, but there was this guy named Steve who saw me in the midst of my hurt, in the midst of my pain, and he could tell that I was searching and wandering and looking for hope. And he just said, hey, would you consider serving with our junior high students? And I said, man, Steve, I don't think you know who I am. I don't think you want me serving with students. I have no idea who Jesus is. And he's like, that's okay. You don't have to lead. Like, I just need you to throw a football. Can you throw a football? And I was like, yeah, I'm a like 18, 19-year-old kid. I'm like, yeah, I could throw a football. I could throw it over those mountains. And so I show up my first night. I'm like so excited to throw a football with junior high boys. No idea what I'm walking into. And I get there, and within like the first 30 minutes, there's like junior high boys all over the place. And I'm throwing a football. I'm like, man, I'm killing this. Like, I was meant to be a junior high leader. Like, what in the world? One of the other leaders walks up to me and says, hey, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to get out of here. I'm like, what? Like, what do you mean? He's like, I don't know who you are, but you are not throwing a football with my kid dressed like that. And I was like, what? And I looked down, and sure enough, I was wearing a t-shirt with a naked girl on the front, everything showing. And in my head, I had no idea. I didn't know that was a thing you shouldn't do at church. I didn't grow up in church. And so junior high boys thought it was pretty cool that I was throwing a football with them, and they loved hanging out with me. And I didn't make it more than 30 minutes my first night as a volunteer before I got kicked out. And so when I tell you, like, never in a million years did I think that I would be here, I'm not lying. But ultimately, I fell in love with Jesus that year, and I became an intern at the church, and they sent me off to Bible college, where I went to in Joplin, Missouri, where I got to help plant the church after college, and I got a front row seat to God growing our church from about 100 people to 3,000 people in just a few years. And can I just tell you, like, none of it was because we were cool or awesome, but because God was at work in our church. And so 3 years ago, I got a call, and the lead pastor of Real Life called and said, hey, would you come back home? You grew up in Santa Clarita. We sent you to Bible college. We're calling you back. Like, we want you to come back, be on staff. And so 3 years ago, my wife and I moved back to Santa Clarita, where we grew up, and have been back on staff now about 3.5 years. And we are loving it. I oversee everything that happens birth through 30 at the church. And my talk today is a culmination of the lessons that I've learned leading, investing in the next generation for the last 15 years, as well as what God has been teaching me as a father to 2 kids under 3. It's a message that I honestly wish my dad would have heard when I was a kid, because I think it would have changed who I was and would have changed the fabric of our family. And now I have the ability to do that. And so my hope is that you'll lean in today. We're going to focus on 3 primary rhythms: our rhythm with God, our rhythm with our family, and our rhythm in our community. These are the 3 rhythms we're going to look at. And this, again, can all be boiled down, and is boiled down by Jesus when he says the greatest commandment in Scripture is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. That, in fact, like, if you love God, then you will love people. Like, there is not another option. So with me being new around here, with a show of hands, how many of us in the room are parents? How many of you guys are parents? Okay, good majority. How many of us in the room know a parent? Yeah, should be everybody. Yeah, awesome. Well, then this message is for you. If you're not a parent, my hope is that you will hear this and ask God, how can I help build the kingdom for people who like me, didn't have parents who were living this out? Right? Like I am a product not of great parenting, like deeply rooted biblical parenting. I am a product of biblical people standing in the gap for my parents and standing in the gap for me so that I could be here today. And so I want to encourage you today to think about how you too can stand in the gap. One of the things you'll hear me say often is the next generation is not the future of the church, that they are the church right now. And that if we wait around for them to one day have more influence or one day have more equity or authority, then the church will slowly die at our hands. But rather, if we can figure out how to equip the next generation and empower them to step fully into who God has called them and created them to be, then we as a church are going to win and we're going to replace ourselves so that we can move on to the next thing. You see, when God gets a hold of our youth, revival happens. And with this year being the year to find our people, I want to encourage you with something. That maybe as you heard Casey talk about that, I'm assuming you guys have heard that said, that this is the year to find our people, that maybe you thought, man, I'm looking for some people who are in the same stage of life as me. Maybe I'm looking for some people who have kids the same age as my kids, or maybe I'm looking for some other empty nesters. Can I challenge you that maybe your people should include somebody who doesn't think like you, talk like you, shop like you? And maybe if you are in the older generation, that you would include some young people in your people this year. And if you're a young person, will you begin to think about who has a little bit more seasoned life than you that you can invite into your life so that they can lead you and guide you along the way? It's one of the best things my wife and I have ever done. That the best community we've been a part of has been multi-generational, and it has been such an impact in our lives. So I want to challenge you with that. As we jump into Proverbs 22 today, it says this: a good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. Rich and poor have this in common: the Lord is the maker of them all. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Humility is the fear of the Lord. Its wages are riches and honor and life. And the paths of the wicked are snares and pitfalls, but those who would preserve their life stay far from them. Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. I love this passage because the writer of Proverbs simply is laying out what a better way of doing life looks like. Right? In verse 1, he simply says, a good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. And if we're being honest, our world tells us that like what you gain in life and what you can accumulate in life is the most important thing about you. And what we see Jesus say time and time again is like, hey, when you die, nothing you have is going to go with you. The only thing that matters is the legacy that you will leave in your family and in your community. And so the way in which you impact is so important. It's more important than silver and gold. We're often heard that this is compared to the road less traveled, that in life we will have decisions to make and decisions to live with. And I love verse 3. It says, the prudent see danger and take refuge, and the simple keep going and pay the penalty. That word prudent simply means acting with or showing care for and thought for the future. So why does this matter for us, and what does it have to do with the rhythms of our lives? Well, two things I don't want us to miss is this. We must not stop looking forward to the future and who God is shaping us to be if we want to have a healthy rhythm in our own lives. Here's what I mean. When we take our eyes off of who we are becoming, often we begin to settle for who we have become. And again, hear that. When we take our eyes off of who we are becoming, we often settle for who we have become. We settle for resentment. We settle for anger. We settle for discomfort. And this is just how it's always going to be. Rather than to lean in those moments and pray, God, would you lead me? Would you guide me? Would you meet me in the pain of this season? Because it doesn't make sense. Are you willing to align your rhythms with God's rhythms, or do you need to dictate the rhythm of your life? At Real Life, we call this starting with the end in mind, for ourselves and for those who we are responsible for. I lead a child dedication class every 6 months, and the first thing I talk about is we want to start with the end in mind if we want to see our kids become the very things that we hope for them. The second thing is this: if we don't know who we are, or better yet, whose we are, we will never be able to help others find their purpose or identity. If we don't know who we are, better yet, whose we are, then we will never be able to help others with their identity. We won't be able to help our family, our next generation, our friends at work, those who are longing for comfort, because we don't have it ourselves. which is ultimately what it goes on to say in verse 6, to like start your children off in the way they should go, and they will not depart from it. I think as parents, we would all say like, yeah, like that's what we want. Like I want my kids to grow up and like love Jesus, but like how do I actually do that? Like as a next gen director, this is one of the biggest questions I wrestle with parents over, and them going like, hey, I just want my kids to like love God. How do I do that? And I try not to oversimplify it, but my answer is always like, so model it. Like love God and love people and like let them see that in your home and let them see that in your service to the church. You see, my wife and I have a 3-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old son, and we often ask ourselves, who do we want them to become? And one of the things that we talk often about is that like we want our kids to be people of prayer. Prayer is one of those things that in the church, I don't know if you feel good at prayer, but I feel like everybody I talk to just goes, man, I don't know if I'm any good at it. I don't know how to do it. And the last thing I want my kid to ever say is, I just don't know how to do it. And I don't know what that means. Like I want them to have a habit and a lifestyle of prayer. And so one of the things that my wife and I have started doing is every night for the last 2 years, we ask our daughter these questions. What and who do we need to pray for? Now, my daughter was 1 year old when we started asking these questions. Like, there was a whole lot of babble, and there was a whole lot of, like, pizza, like, random things that we needed to pray for. And even now, as my daughter, as we ask these things, some days the answers will blow you away, and they will melt your heart, and there are other days where it is, like, the silliest thing in the world, and we just laugh at the things that our daughter said. But the maturity of our 3-year-old in processing death and emotion. One of our best friends lost a sister about 6 months ago, and she has a 3-year-old daughter. And my daughter found out that she had lost her mommy. And in the midst of that night when I said, what and who do you need to pray for? Instantly, she said, we need to pray for Emerson's mommy. And we need to pray for Emerson because her mommy's in heaven. As a 3-year-old, I'm sitting there like, oh gosh, like, how are you this mature? And on the nights now where we forget to ask or we're caught up in the craziness of our schedule, my daughter goes, Daddy, I can't go to bed yet. We haven't prayed. I'm like, oh, baby, I'm so sorry. I missed the most important thing of our night. And my hope is that in doing so, that when she gets to middle school, that when she has that bully or she has that tough day or she looks in the mirror and she doesn't love what she sees, that we do not have to try to convince her to pray about it, but that she will already be going to bat with God and that she will be a person of prayer in those seasons way before opposition ever arises. You see, as a next-gen director for the last 15 years, I have had countless parents come to me and bring their kid who they caught smoking weed or doing something they shouldn't have been doing, and they'll plop them down in front of me and they'll say, you're the youth pastor, will you just fix them? And I'm like, oh man, that's a lot. Like, what's going on? And oftentimes I sit down across from that kid and I go, hey, you don't want to be here. So how'd you get here? And I just listen to this kid talk about the way in which he's frustrated and he doesn't feel seen, he doesn't feel valued, he doesn't feel loved. And I'm not going to fix any of it because I have zero equity in this kid's life. And so my challenge to parents is, man, like you have to now establish a rhythm with your kid to help fix this. I can't do it for you. I wish I could, but I just can't. It starts in the beginning with who we want our kids to become. So what do we do with those who don't have parents who are living this out? Well, church, this is where you and I get to step in, right? It's where people stepped in for me. Like we get to stand in the gap, not as somebody who like knows it all and who's going to come in and fix kids, because again, nothing we say or do is going to fix them, but our presence simply will help them to feel known, valued, and loved by God. The best youth workers and leaders I have ever seen in my life are not the young, loud, crazy leaders. They're not the stereotypical leaders. No, they're those who are willing to lean in when everyone else leans out. Let me tell you about a lady named Pam Wirt. She was a grandma in our church, and she cared deeply for the next generation. She was actually one of my coaches in the nursery, and she was great at holding babies. And she would say, like, Conor, I've been doing this for the last 50 years, and this is my sweet spot. And yet she would, in our conversations, I would share stories about what God was doing in the next generation, and she would say things like, Conor, I just wish there was a better way for me to connect. Like, I just don't understand high school kids. They don't make sense to me. And I just started to challenge her to look for opportunities to leverage her gifts for the next generation. And Pam and her husband Cliff ran our empty nesters group and our retired group at the church. And we spoke about the next generation. Pam said, I just wish there was more that I could do. So she asked me if she could recruit her life group and start cooking for our students on Sunday nights. And so I've got a picture of her on one of our first nights. This is her and like 6 or 7 of the people from her life group. She actually tagged me in this last week on Instagram and was just kind of telling stories about what God did in our church. And man, I love this because when we started, we were a church plant meeting in the YMCA, and over the next few years, it grew to a couple hundred students. And Pam's faithfulness helped and bless our students and changed the fabric of our community. Can I see that next picture? So the next picture is the team that she grew that team to on Sunday nights over the next 3 years. So it grew from about 5 or 6 people to about 40 to 50 couples that would come every Sunday night, and they would cook a meal for our students. And while our students were in programming and they were worshiping and they were being taught to, they would pray every night for those kids by name. So they would ask us, hey, who's here? We would give them a list of names. And while those kids were sitting in the message for them, these empty nesters faithfully prayed over them. And what we watched begin to happen was those students come back into the nursery and serve alongside Pam and her team and kids ministry. And we watched God unite the oldest generation and the youngest generation in our church. And everybody in between kind of sat in awe of what God was doing. And we all went, man, what is happening? And our church grew leaps and bounds because of the way in which Pam used the things that she had for the kingdom purpose, rather than to say, I'm just too old. And I just don't know how I could ever. I don't have the energy to do that anymore. She said, here's what I can do. I can cook and I can recruit. So let me get a bunch of ladies and their husbands to come and be a part of this. And man, I just tell you, it blessed the kingdom. And there are so many students who love Jesus now because of her faithfulness. Hebrews 12 says this: therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders in the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition for sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Friends, I don't know what your history or your experience with young people is. You may be sitting here today hearing this message, getting all fired up about the ways in which you can engage with the next generation. You may be like my friend Kevin, who came to me a few weeks ago and said, Conor, I can't stand young people because all they do is bicker and complain. But what I love about Kevin is in the midst of that, he said, and you know what? Because of that, I think I need to lead a small group of young adults, because I got a lot of opinions about young adults, but I've not done anything to help them. And so can you connect me and help me lead a young adult group? And now he's been leading for the last 6 months and absolutely crushing it. And God is challenging him in more ways than you could imagine. And it has been so fun to see. Friends, all of us are here because someone stood in the gap for us. Somebody met us in the midst of our brokenness when we didn't deserve it and didn't leave us there. And now it's our turn to carry the baton and plant some trees and to water them so that one day somebody else can sit in the shade of them. I love line 2 and 3 in this. It says, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Friends, Jesus went to great extremes for sinners to come home, and so should we. We now get to stand in the gap and show Jesus to our communities through the way in which we use everything God gave us for kingdom impact. My kids will know Jesus because of Dave Wilson, Steve Myers, Rusty George, Michael DeFazio. I could go on and on about the people who impacted my life, who ultimately impacted my kids' lives. And like now I ask my daughter every night, what and who should we pray for, because of guys like Michael and Steve and Rusty and Dave. And they have no idea the impact they're going to have on the next generation. And I have to believe that if we were to read this passage in Hebrews 12 about the great cloud of witnesses, a lot of your names would be listed among that, and the way in which you're investing in the next generation. And if they're not yet, then my challenge to you is that you would invest so that one day when we read that list, your name is among those. You see, there's a story in the Bible that tells about a father and his 2 sons, and what we'll see is that none of us are exempt from playing a part in God's story. In fact, we all just have to choose the part that we will play. And so we will close our time with this today. I'm going to read a pretty good portion of scripture. You can read along with me, or you can just kind of close your eyes and listen. But then we're going to kind of unpack this story. Many of you may have heard this story. If you haven't, it's one of my favorite passages in all of the Bible. It says this: it's the parable of the prodigal son. And he said, there was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger to them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country, and he squandered his property in reckless living. And where he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him out to his field to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as your hired servant. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was out in the field, and he came and drew near to the house, and he heard music and dancing. And he called to one of the servants and asked, what do these things mean? And he said to him, your brother has come home, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound. But he was angry, and he refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, look, these many years I have served you, and I have never disobeyed you. I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when his son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him? He said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this brother of yours was dead and is alive. He was lost and he is found. Friends, I want you to picture that moment. Like, there's a lot of parents in this room. Like a son coming to his father and asking for the inheritance, like basically saying like, hey, I wish you were dead, would die already. Like, I just want my money so that I can live my life. Like, I'm sick and tired of you trying to tell me how to live my life. And so this father looks at his son, and rather than like belittle him, he gives him what he asks for, and he sends him away, and he runs off with the inheritance and he squanders it. That he says basically, I know how to live my life and I don't need any help from you. In his youth, he thought he knew better. Friends, for the first time in his life, he was living without boundaries or rules, and the parties were pretty good until they weren't. And what I love about this story is the son begins to realize that he thought he had everything he needed. He thought he had all that he wanted until he finds himself hollow and empty, realizing that he needed something more. Have you ever been there? I know I have. I know that like I ran from God in so many ways and so many seasons, thinking that I knew how to do it. And what I really wanted was control. And I thought I knew what would make me happy. And so I tried to stuff this God-filled hole in my heart with things and relationships and drinking and like you name it. And I, at the end of the day, found myself hollow and empty. And it wasn't until I came to the end of myself that I realized I needed something different. You see, there comes a time in all of our lives where we come to our senses and we surrender our way for God's way. Maybe you're here right now and you're in need of a restart. My hope is that you wouldn't leave here today without like talking to somebody about that. My belief about a place like this is that it's a refuge and it's a outpost of hope for people who are weary and tired. And so if that's you today, like, would you not leave without talking to somebody and just saying like, man, I'm so sick and tired of like carrying it all myself and trying to be in control of my rhythm, and I'm ready to surrender my rhythm for God's rhythm. Don't leave here without aligning the rhythm of your life with God's. Maybe you hit a point in your life long ago. My hope is that you don't miss the back half of this story. You see, the father sits on his porch and waits for the son in anticipation to return. And one day that dream comes true. I can only imagine a father sitting on his porch every night, longing to see his son come over that horizon. How many times he leapt out of his chair in hopes that it was his son who come home. For it to finally come true. And as he sees his son off in the distance, he just takes off in a dead sprint. And before his son can even get the words out of his mouth of like, Father, I've sinned against his dad's wrapping his arms around the son. And he's yelling to the servants, get my son a robe, get him a ring, Get him sandals. And I picture this like ugly cry dad moment. And I can only imagine like this son in the midst of his brokenness, just feeling so ashamed, like literally smelling like pig poop. And his dad just holding him, saying, it's okay, son. It's okay, son. I'm so glad you're home. All of those things, the robe, the sandals, the ring, they were signs of reinstatement. The son was begging to be a servant, and the father says, no, you're not a servant, you're my son. Friends, this is what God has done for you and I. And this isn't the end of the story. You see, there's another group of people in the crowd that Jesus is speaking to. They're the Pharisees and the religious elite. And as Jesus is telling this story, this is one of 3 stories he's actually telling on this day. The first story is about a lost coin. And the assumption would be that somebody goes out to find that lost coin. And the next story is about a lost sheep or a lost goat. And somebody who's going after that goat. And this is the third story that they're telling. And you would assume that as the son leaves and is lost, that the father would go out after him, but he doesn't. You see, this story has implications. The Pharisees are sitting here with their bitterness and resentment. The older brother watches his younger brother come home and he doesn't want to celebrate. Rather, he argues with the father, saying things like, I slaved for you all these years and you never gave me a goat to celebrate with my friends, telling us that his obligation to the father was one of fear rather than of love. You see, it tells us that the service to the father was really about what he could get out of the deal rather than the submission to the father. You see, the son coming home has implications on the older brother. You see, the older brother is mad because now the son, when he takes his inheritance a second time, is taking, again, more money from the younger brother. Like the lost son coming home costs the brother something. Friends, the further we are removed from the life-changing gift of grace, the easier it is to become cynical and forget that God created us for relationship, to pursue one another. And my fear is that the further we get from the gift of God, of grace, the more complacent we become, and we begin to want to dictate the rhythms of our life instead of submitting the rhythms of our life to Jesus. Maybe you gave your life to Jesus a long time ago and you're really good at reading your Bible and you're really good at like showing up here. And if we're being honest deep down, like you feel loved by God if you can mark off all the things you did for God this week. And it becomes more about routine than relationship. You see, one of the things I love most about Jesus is that, like I said earlier, the scriptures he is reading, he knew that they would call to the forefront of those who were listening more than what was heard. You see the story about the lost coin and a woman frantically going to find it, the one about the lost sheep and the shepherd frantically going to find it. Then he tells this story. And the father doesn't frantically go looking for the son, but what Jesus knows is that this story would call to the forefront of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law another story in the Bible of 2 sons called Cain and Abel, who, as God looks at him, says, you are your brother's keeper. And what we see here is that it was actually the responsibility of the older brother to go out and find the lost son. And he missed it because he was so worried about just maintaining what he had rather than longing for those who were lost. Friends, I don't know where you're at today. I don't know if you're the younger brother and you just need to come home and receive grace and mercy, friends. I don't know if you're the older brother who need to turn your eyes away from the routine of religion and begin to focus on the relationship of the Lord. Because it's not fair to the older brother. It cost him dearly. And running after lost people and following Jesus will and should cost us something. But don't ever forget that Jesus paid the highest price for you and I. We were unworthy, and yet he died in our place. You see, something sticks out to me about this story is that there's no resolution to whether or not the brother ever came back inside. And that's kind of messed me up. We had a friend come and preach at Real Life, and she pointed this out, and it has stuck with me ever since. Like, I can't unhear that. Because the assumption is that this is our part of the story to play. That we don't get to hear whether or not the older brother came in and joined the party because it was his choice to make. Friends, will we choose to join the party and be a part of what God is doing here? Or will we simply stay out back and be mad when God brings home lost people? because it cost us something or it was inconvenient to us. Friends, this is the year to find our people, and I believe that it starts like the younger brother and simply coming home. And the longer we're at home, not allowing ourselves to become like the big brother and miss out on the joy of welcoming people into the home. So ask yourselves this question: are the rhythms of my life aligned with God's rhythms? Let me pray for us. God, I'm thankful